The real lesson may come from less than the values the leaderships announce and more from the behavior they reward and protect. It's not what you say, but what you as a leader or an organization do.
It's what we tolerate. It's what we reward. When selfishness is tolerated or even rewarded, it becomes, this is how we do things around here, then that means I have to do it too. Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership? Why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Justin Hamrick. Justin, today we've reached the third installment in our 5-part series on what to do with a selfish yet highly productive person. In the first 2 episodes of this series, we examined whether the selfish high performer is truly productive when we consider their effect on the whole organization. We also discussed what happens when organizations increasingly endorse, resource, protect, and organize themselves around that person. And today, we're shifting our attention to the people who are watching. When leaders reward someone whose success is accompanied by selfish or harmful behavior, what lesson does everyone else learn? The central idea here for today's episode is simple. What you reward is what you get. Lance Armstrong was once one of the most celebrated athletes in the world, and I have to admit, I was a huge fan. I think I've read 7 books on Lance Armstrong throughout that period. They say if you read 5 books on a given topic, you're an expert. So theoretically, that makes me an expert or a fanboy, whatever it was back then. I'm not so much now. But I was a huge fan after the time. And that story, a part of it is the story just seems so right. After surviving cancer, he returned to professional cycling. He returned to the highest, the pinnacle of it. He won the Tour de France 7 consecutive times. He was an international symbol of determination and resilience. He attracted sponsors and money, attention, prestige, celebrity to himself, to his team, and to the sport. The visible results were extraordinary, but the organization surrounding Armstrong was not rewarding only the victories. We now know it was also protecting the methods used to achieve them. The US Postal Service cycling team operated an organized doping program involving Lance Armstrong and numerous teammates. Riders entering that environment learned that talent, training, effort alone wasn't enough to compete at that high level, at the highest level, to keep their place on the team and to share in its success. They were expected to participate in the system or at least remain silent about it. Omerta is what it's called. Those who resisted could lose opportunities or find themselves pushed aside. The pattern became self-reinforcing. Armstrong won. The organization celebrated and protected him. The methods associated with winning became normalized. New riders learned what was expected. Silence and complicity became part of belonging to the team. Eventually, the entire structure collapsed. Armstrong was stripped of his Tour de France titles and banned from sanctioned competition for life. Teammates were disciplined. Careers and reputations were damaged, destroyed, and ended. Achievements once presented as evidence of excellence became evidence of a deeply corrupted culture. And I would offer that remains. We still look at the winners and we think, is it real? This is obviously an extreme example. Most selfish high performers are not directing organized cheating or pressuring colleagues to engage in serious misconduct. But that cultural mechanism is the same. The psychological processes that occur in human organizations, they're all the same. When an organization rewards someone, other people don't just see the result. They also see the behavior that accompanied it. If you do this, you will get that. When leaders repeatedly reward, protect, or elevate somebody whose success is intertwined with selfish or harmful conduct, they're telling everyone else that that conduct is acceptable or perhaps even necessary.
I mean, they're setting the standard by that, by supporting it or rewarding it. They're setting the standard. I think this raises a really important question. When an organization or a leadership structure rewards a selfish high performer, what are they actually rewarding?
That's a great question. And I think the organization is so enamored with, so bought into that success, whatever it is that person's bringing to the organization, They think that that thing is so vital to them that they will risk their reputation, their very existence to continue to achieve it. Highly successful organizations can become addicted, I think, to success because organizations are made up of people, and people certainly become addicted to success because success is every time that we achieve something, we get feedback, we get neurofeedback, dopamine receptors fire, we get pleasure from it. And so we continue to seek that as individuals, but the same thing is said of a collective, because if we're part of this group that's achieving something, we're getting that same feedback. The guy who is the field goal kicker, okay, for an NFL team may not be on the field a whole lot, but he gets the same reward from dopamine when the team wins. Or even the manager, the water person, who's always squirting the Gatorade in people's mouths. They get the same feedback. So organizations are the same thing. So they're in a real sense, they're rewarding that for themselves, and they're rewarding the negative behavior. They don't intend to. I don't think anybody out there is saying, hey, here's this person who is mean toward everybody else, hoards all the goodies to themselves, keeps people from advancing so that he can do great things. I don't think they're intending to reward that. They're rewarding, again, in the previous episodes in this series, we've talked about people separate what the person is achieving from the effect that they have on others, and you shouldn't do that. They have to be intertwined and looked at from the organizational standpoint. But what people do is they do separate that, and so they look at, well, he's achieving this set of things that we are addicted to on some level, and doing all this damage over here, but they don't see that. But in fact, because they are intertwined, they're rewarding the bad behavior, and they're rewarding the effect that it has, the negative effect that it has on people. So it's a really complex set of rewards if we look at it from that perspective, none of which are positive. Somebody may intend to communicate, we're valuing this person's extraordinary results, but as we said in the previous episode, people see, hey, look, the reality is this is how people succeed around here. And that's culture forming. A fairly generic definition of culture that people throw around a lot. I think it actually was born out of, at least based on a lot of the readings that I've seen come from Harvard Business School, they often use this as their definition of culture, how we do things around here. That's how, that's the definition that often is in a lot of books that come out there. And so I think it's that, right? Like, oh, this is how we do things around here. So in fact, that is absolutely culture forming. And so you're building this negative culture. I mean, if you think about US Postal, it was this negative culture. A new guy would walk into a hotel room and there's Lance or somebody else who's getting, packed red blood cells. And they just look at him like, hey man, this is just normal. Right? And it becomes the culture.
Yeah. It seems pretty clear, and we've talked about this in the previous episodes in this series, that it doesn't matter what you say, what you have written in your vision statement, what's posted on the walls, or what your organization says about its values, if you reward and promote behavior and actions that contradicts them. It's not what you say, it's what you do. That's what people learn from, is your actions.
Let me pause from our conversation to ask you, the listener, a question. Are you ready to turn leadership principles into daily practice? Are you ready to become the leader you're capable of being? If so, my new book, The 4 Stars of Leadership Development Guide, is specifically designed to help you do that. You'll get a 12-week program designed to help you strengthen your character, competence, caring, and communication. Each chapter comes with focused reflection, illustrative stories that bring the concepts to life, and concrete actions you can apply immediately. No matter where you are in your leadership journey, it's a resource that is guaranteed to help you. You can find it online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all outlets where you get your books. Get your copy today and begin becoming the leader you're capable of being. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's take it outside of let's say, leadership space, and just look at any human interactions. It's not what you say, it's what you do, right? I mean, our kids, we can always look to them and say, hey, we may say we value X, Y, and Z, but they're watching to see what we actually invest
Mhm.
in, you know, or what we are doing. You may say, I really value being kind to people, but if all they see is you being mean, they know that's not true. And that carries so much, that's so far reaching. There's so much more repercussion from that. Because if you say, I'm just a mean person, then they say, well, Dad's just a mean person and you're a mean person. At least you've got that consistency, internal integrity in a sense, right? If you say that you value one thing and you are doing something totally different, not only are they seeing that negative that you're doing, but now they see you as, in effect, a liar. You can't be trusted because you say one thing, you do another. And so I think that totally erodes what is going on in any organization, any relationship. This really gets to an idea that's called espoused values versus enacted values, where, and people have studied this, where we do have a tendency, as you said, hang stuff on the walls, where we say, this is what we believe, this is what we're about, right? We espouse those. We've set them, printed them, whatever it is. But then there is the actual enacted or lived out values. And it's that degree of alignment between those that allows people to determine a lot about an organization, about a leader. If there's dissonance between them, it causes confusion, anxiety, distrust. And those are all terrible for culture. I mean, culture isn't created by, as you've said, what we have hanging printed on the wall. It's what we live out. It's what we tolerate. It's what we reward. This is how we do things around here. That is the creation of culture. And part of this is that when selfishness is tolerated or even rewarded, it becomes, again, a model for other people. This is how we do things around here. Then that means I have to do it too.
There's so many examples of one. I always think of the one where, let's say everybody's sitting in traffic and one person decides that they're more important than the whole or the team, people in traffic, and they get in the emergency lane and drive past everybody. And
I hate that.
let's say that there's a cop there that doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
That person who's doing that is getting rewarded for that bad behavior, the breaking the rules, which are, on the signs. And when you take your driver's test, that's not what that's for. And if there's no correction but that the leader, the policeman in this one, just sort of sits there and lets it happen, then everyone else is looked at as naive because they didn't do that. They didn't think about it. They weren't smart enough to do that. And then other people do it. And, it would create this chaos. The rules that were established and spoken about aren't broken. And so it looks to everybody like, well, they just don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to game the system. They don't know, because that poor behavior, bad behavior is being rewarded. The person that lies on their taxes and gets a big return and there's no penalty for it, or the penalty gets ignored or something, like, oh, well, that could create, those type of things could create a culture that you have the written rules, but the culture is, but we don't follow that. We don't follow that. We circumvent the rules because this is the culture. Like at SMU, when they started paying their players, like it was there's a whole
back when that wasn't legal.
Yeah, they're like, that we're going to pay it, and that's just the culture. Like you had that, and it ends up finally exploding, and the culture going to a place where they basically get their program destroyed. Like that's sort of what it had. But those sort of things where yes, there's a written rule, but everyone understands the culture is completely different, is very powerful.
As you're saying that, I'm reminded of some studies that people have done. Basically, they put people in computer environments and they don't know who the other people are within the environments. And usually this is in the setting of almost like a card game or something there. and they're supposed to work together, or vice versa. And those people who always choose to help themselves instead of help the group, the studies have shown that, if everybody's supposed to collaborate, but there's one person who's a bad actor, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
is selfish and is always making moves to try to just help themselves and not help anybody else, the group will then start trying to undermine that person, and even will take a loss to make sure that person gets what they deserve. So even though even though the rest of the group might choose to help themselves, they would rather take a loss and see that person fail than to see them keep being selfish, And so I think that's that's not a part of our, science break today, but that's a really important set of studies that have been done out there to show that this sort of thing, if it's violating standards and norms, it could really create some negative interactions.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, the psychological safety, right? Like, what are the costs of a difficult high performer? This is one of them, right? Like, people, I don't want to say they undermine each other, but they're not going to be collaborative. They're like, why am I going to help? I'm not going to be rewarded for collaboration. Like, this person's getting all the rewards and everything. Like that you talk about culture killers, like that's one of them. Like, this is one of the things you have to measure when you have to consider allocation of resources to difficult or selfish high performers. Like, what is the cost? What is the cost short term? What is the cost long term? And what is the cost to the culture and the far reaching distance of the group? So, we sort of went into the what are we talking about? But why does this really matter? Like, this is the so what? So why does this all matter? If the high performers high performing, why does it matter? Like, it sounds like the organization is going to gain.
I think to answer that, we've got to address the question of what happens to the people who are trying to behave collaboratively when they see selfishness rewarded. So, or to put that another way, I guess, is how does rewarding a selfish high performer change the behavior of people who are not naturally selfish? What are your thoughts on that? Like, how, I've already alluded to in some of the science just a minute ago, but what are your thoughts on how people might respond to that?
You see it all the time. Like, if people are behaving poorly, the good actors, we'll say, are much less likely to go above and beyond. They're like, why am I doing this? And they really have to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Like, that person's doing X, Y, and Z, things that I wouldn't do, and they're getting rewarded for it, whether financially or successfully. Like, they're getting all these rewards, and it makes the good actors feel like a sucker, like they are behaving naively. And, I guess I don't know how to game the system. It's like that person sitting in traffic that's just trying to follow the rules, trying to do that. And they see somebody zoom past them and get to their destination earlier. And they're like, they have to think to themselves, like, why am I doing this? Like, and their own personal morality can only hold up so far. And if you're talking about them going above and beyond, then they're just going to lower back to the standard. They're like, why would I try to do more? This isn't the collaborative nature I'm going to have going beyond. Like, this isn't going to, if it doesn't lead to measurable success, then why am I going to do it? Why am I going to go and spend my resources for this? Because even though the organization says that it values that, I don't see a reward for it. In fact, I see the opposite being rewarded.
Yeah, I mean, I think humans are tremendously adaptive. That's part of our success as a species, is we've been maybe as adaptive other than bacteria or something, right? But as far as somewhat larger organisms, arguably the most adaptive organisms that we know have ever existed. And we adapt in good ways and we adapt in maladaptive ways to the environment, to the context that we're in. So yeah, if we are operating at a certain level with a certain expectation and standard, but there's a different lower standard, we will adapt to that. And that way, it's almost like a regression to the mean, right? Because we see what everybody else is doing and how they're behaving. If they're getting rewarded, then why am I the fool here? I'm left holding the bag. And so everybody can begin to start behaving more like, in this case, the high performer who's, selfish. They may not perform like that person. They may not have the capabilities of delivering on some given metric like that high performer. Okay. But they're doing it from a behavior standpoint. Everybody can't ride the bike like Lance could ride the bike, but they start behaving like Lance did. Oh my goodness. You want to talk about creating a horrible environment. You take all of here's this high performer who's eroding the culture, lowering the standard of behavior. Everybody starts acting like that, but they're not very good performers. Then the productivity that they had as a collective goes away. Now you've just got a bunch of average or below average individuals out for themselves. They spend most of their time focused on themselves and not trying to achieve anything. Your organization is not going to get anywhere. That's an increasingly toxic environment that will wreak havoc on that organization. You can design a situation that was much worse for eroding organizational culture and behavior and standards and so forth. That's why this is so important, I think. Do you have an example where you've seen this phenomenon?
Several things come to mind. One is I've been in systems before where you could make requests for your work, and the requests weren't limited. If you wanted to be off on this day or a shorter day this day, and you could sort of do that. And there were sort of two approaches to it. One, that people would only ask for it if they really needed it because they understood the group as a whole, that work should be equally distributed. And there were ones that sort of gamed the system, that they made as many requests as possible. At this point, there were no limit on the requests that could be made. And it was really the squeaky wheel getting it. They just sort of thought that no one else was smart enough to do it. Where in reality, the other people just thought that the assumption was, well, somebody else probably needs it more than I do because it wasn't a really important thing. It was, but that had people just being really selfish with that, and it went unchecked for a long period of time. And it had to come where we had to change it and legislate good behavior because the culture had become so selfish that people were willing to step on top of others to advance their own agenda.
Use the word legislate. And I was thinking about people say you can't legislate morality. That may be true, but you can legislate against immorality.
Yeah.
That's our system, I think, right? That's the system we have. I mean, you can't murder people. You can't, like all those sorts of things. So it's the same there. I mean, yeah, people are going to find ways to return to the ground state, to do as little as possible a lot of times, right? Or certain people, maybe not everybody, but at the end of the day, I think isn't this really just operant conditioning that we're talking about? If we reward certain behaviors, we're going to see more of those behaviors. And I think that's a very basic leadership concept. Yet people do it over and over when it comes to the selfish high performer. And then they wonder, hey, why is this happening? I mean, we're rewarding this person who is difficult, I'll just say, person to deal with. And yet we wonder why they continue to behave thusly, or why other people are starting to act like them.
Yeah, I mean, you think about even like if it was on a little league team, you've got a kid who's your number one hitter, number one pitcher, but never shows up to practice. When he shows up to practice, it's late. He doesn't warm up, sort of doesn't hustle out there. But every single tournament and game, you start him, what you're telling the rest of the team is it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Practice doesn't matter. None of that. And I mean, you're talking about eroding a culture really quick, especially if what you've said is that it does matter. Hustle matters. How you practice, show up on time. Like we value hard work. But if what you're speaking to it and in your actions is not what it is, then that is what natural human behavior will go to. Why would I do this if it's not going to give me the result I want, which the result I want is to play the game.
Yeah.
And if you tell me to do all these things, but then I do all of them, but somebody that doesn't do them gets the reward, then yeah, like what would you expect? Speaking of operant conditioning, what does the science tell us with this idea in regards to leadership with what we're talking about today?
Yeah. As usual, I'll touch on 3 studies that address this topic. The first study is by Neil Ashkenazi and his colleagues, and they examined how organizational rewards and punishments influence ethical decision-making. And they found that information about organizational rewards and punishments shaped managers' expectations about the consequences of their choices. Among managers with lower levels of moral development, expecting the organization to condone unethical conduct was associated with less ethical conditions or decisions. That effect was not universal. Managers with higher levels of moral development responded differently.
So when harmful behavior produces success without consequences, people might conclude that the behavior is acceptable, or at least not disqualifying. You're not going to get punished for it.
Yeah, exactly. A second study by Michael Brown and his group used social learning theory to explain ethical leadership. Their model emphasized that leaders shape expected conduct through their own example, their communication, their decisions, and the behavior they reinforce. They looked across 7 studies and perceived ethical leadership was associated with outcomes including greater trust, dedication, job satisfaction, and willingness to report problems. That means that unethical leadership would be associated with the converse of those: lower trust, less dedication, less job satisfaction, less willingness to report problems.
The real lesson may come from less than the values the leaderships announce and more from the behavior they reward and protect. We've talked about this before. It's not what you say, but what you as a leader or an organization do.
The final study by Lucia Belora Beinengraber and her colleagues examined management systems, self-focused behavior, and workplace climate. They found that counterproductive behavior among managers was associated with a more self-focused climate among employees. And they also found some evidence that beneficial association of ethically focused management systems was weakened when peer managers behaved in more self-focused ways. Because this was an observational study, it doesn't necessarily prove that managers' behavior alone caused the climate, but it reinforces a familiar principle. Formal values lose force when people repeatedly see different behavior rewarded or tolerated.
Yeah. So people may hear what the organization says about its values or vision statement or whatever, but they learn what it actually values by watching what happens to those around them, especially when addressing a difficult high performer.
Yeah, exactly. So taken together, these 3 studies suggest 3 things. People adjust their choices based partly on what they believe the organization will reward or punish, operant conditioning. They learn expected conduct by observing leaders and the consequences attached to behavior, role modeling. And when self-focused conduct becomes visible and tolerated, it can contribute to a more self-focused workplace. The science doesn't suggest that everyone will automatically imitate one selfish high performer, but it does suggest that rewards and consequences shape what people do. We know that. When leaders repeatedly reward selfish behavior because it produces results, the lesson to everyone else is simple. This behavior is what works here.
Yeah, it's going back to the Lance Armstrong. The new guy comes into the hotel room and is like, okay, this is sort of what we do around here. I go back to an example I've used before. The opposite is also true. There's a story of Nick Saban's dynasty Alabama teams, and a new player comes in, sort of a prima donna freshman, immensely talented, and starts sort of half doing practice and not really giving it everything. And one of the seniors comes to him and is like, that's not what we do here. So that same type of high performer, bad behavior tolerated versus a culture built on the opposite, which is like, we don't care who you are. That is not our standard. That is not what we do. So we've covered the what and the so what and the science behind it. Let's get to, especially with this series, what really matters. Turn it into the now what. How do we make this practical for our listeners who are looking to grow in their team, grow as leaders? What can we do to get back on course if we find ourselves in a position where we have a selfish high performer who has been consistently rewarded, has gone unchecked, and is, now that we're looking at it, through this lens is affecting the entire team.
Yeah, I think, as we've hit on in the prior episodes of this 5-part series, we need to first stop viewing performance and behavior as separate things. They are related, intimately related when we're talking about a collective of people working together. So we need to start thinking about that high performer's overall impact on the organization, not just their individual performance. We need to look at how they're impacting other people and what their effect on that organization is, stepping away from the metrics in a real sense. That's the fundamental first step. Once we've done that, and this is the hard part, listeners, we have to address the issue. And that requires balance, okay? You can't just come in full steam. But the other thing is we can't act like this high performer isn't achieving. That's indefensible. I mean, of the things that we do actually have, the metrics are there. The sales are there. The grants are there. The papers are there. Whatever it is, they're there. So you can't act like that doesn't exist. They are productive. That's why we're calling them a high performer. But we got to acknowledge their individual contribution while simultaneously addressing that negative impact they're having on the overall organization. And that can be really challenging because the selfish high performer is usually quite egocentric. And so you're bringing to this egocentric person a shortcoming they may have no insight about. Many times they don't. Sometimes they absolutely do. But it's going to be challenging. But at the end of the day, you got to hold your ground on this. If they push back, that's not true. This, whatever it may be, they push back. You got to reiterate the importance of collective achievement, not individual achievement. This is a place where a lot of people, and I've seen this over and over and over, might be tempted to backpedal. Oh, well, yeah, it's not that bad. I just thought I'd let you know that maybe somebody, one person that I heard, people just suddenly, in my current context, I've seen that over and over and over, the backpedaling. If you do that, you only make things worse. You only give them more license to behave poorly. So you got to stand your ground on that. After having brought that issue out into the open, then you got to set expectations. We talked about that on a prior podcast, multiple podcasts, honestly. And the reality is, as we've talked about before, many people are terrible at setting expectations. But in this scenario, you have to. It's an imperative. You got to set the expectations, and those expectations have to be centered on the person adding value to the organization and the accomplishment of other people. A helpful way to do that is to tie future rewards and opportunities to the impact that the selfish high performer has on team members. That is, if they don't have that impact, if others don't grow and have opportunities and publish papers or whatever it is, as a result of them, they won't get those rewards that they've become accustomed to.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of this, I've talked about this before. I'm a big fan of the show Ted Lasso, and this entire first 2 seasons are sort of revolve around one of the players, Jamie Tart, who is the definition of a difficult high performer. There's a great YouTube video called The Character Arc of him, where the new coach sort of comes in and he's scoring goals, but the team isn't winning. And it's because of the effect he has on the rest of the team, not making passes to other open teammates, not allowing other players to sort of shine. And it comes to a point where the coach is like, I'm benching you. And he's just like, what? Why don't, what are you doing? And the conversation he finally has sort of comes to this. And that's sort of the reward. He's not going to start because of his behavior. And he's like, and he sort of addresses it. And he's like, listen, you are extremely talented, probably one of the most talented people I've ever seen. But you've got to remember you're one of 11. He's like, and if you can turn that me into a we, there is no limit on what you can accomplish. And that's sort of what we want to do when addressing. Like at the end of this, you're not trying to discipline a high performer. As a leader, you're trying to make them the best version of themselves. And the most success they will ever have, personally, professionally, as a member of a team, and as that team, is by doing these things, is by becoming a less disruptive high performer.
Yeah. And In our next episode in this series, we're going to be touching on that, on insight, helping the person or evaluating, does the person have insight into this? Because if they do, you can work with them. If they don't, it might be hard.
So before we close this out, let's leave our listeners with a sort of summary point. What question before the next one in this series should our listeners who really want to grow on their team, grow in the team, grow the team, to really move the team and organization forward, what question should they be thinking about?
I think if someone wanted to succeed in your organization, what behavior would they conclude they should imitate based on the people you reward, protect, and promote? Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of how you can become a better leader starting today. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe. Leave a comment and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.